that. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Eric Moed, partner at UPSA, Office of Open Practice Studio Agency. I'm also a former member of New Ink's Year 7 Hybrid Practice track and current member of New Ink Year 8 in the Future Memory track. Together with my UPSA co-founder, Penelope Phylactopoulos, and fellow Hybrid Practice member, Andrew Chee, of Related Works, we created a publication on the topic of hybridity. We found ourselves in the midst of a track last year called Hybrid Practice, and bonded over the fact that anyone in our lives knew what the hell hybridity meant, or why we choose to function that way in our everyday lives and practices. So before we get too into that, it's important to mention that without the help and support of our very, very generous mentor, track mentor, and life mentor, Rena, and the fine folks at New Ink, none of this would be possible. So thank you so much, Rena, for making this publication possible and encouraging us to do it, and supporting us in doing it. Today's event parallels a preview of the forthcoming publication Hybridity, which we will preview shortly, Penelope will specifically. And the publication is entitled Hybridity because at the core of the project, we sought to answer a simple question. As mentioned, what is hybridity? We got many answers centering around interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, antidisciplinarity, anything but singularity and disciplinarity. But we went deeper. Beyond the buzzwords and descriptors is a level of humanity that's foundational to any successful design practice. So instead of focusing on people as personnel, we delved into the personal side of their practices. We interviewed 10 practices with a parallel set of questions. Their answers are barely contained within the pages of this publication, but they have a strict sense of focus, purpose, and ironically, discipline. Images and personal stories define how each designer's work, ethos, and even modes of living are driven by hybrid practices. The publication is a culmination of a year of collaborations, connections, and observations in the 2020-2021 New Ink Hybrid Practice track. And on that note, Penelope, I'll hand it to you to actually show the people what's within this publication.
Hey, hi everyone, I'm Penelope. As Eric said, I'm the other half of UPSA. Thank you all for being here today. We're truly honored that our fellow New Ink members in the Hybrid Practice track trusted us in representing their thoughts and hybrid journeys. As a track at New Ink, we all agreed that it would be valuable to share our experiences and work in defining, becoming, and actively being hybrid. As Eric mentioned, again, the publication highlights 10 practices ranging from designers, architects, technologists, community organizers, data scientists, amongst others. Working together with Andrew Chee, a graphic designer, computer engineer, currently studying architecture, and Eric and myself are both public artists, designers, and reluctant architects. We can't get away from it. Meeting weekly for the last months to create the publication became kind of a ritual. We very quickly realized that the same way that in our meeting we get to be very candid, open to new ideas and processes, it was important for us to reflect that process and energy in the publication itself. After much discussion internally and with fellow designers, critics, and publishers, we chose the format of one-to-one interviews with each practice, which gave the opportunity for everyone to get to know each other better and share in the stream of consciousness their hybrid journey and getting deeper in the humanity of hybridity. So we based the interviews on a modest number of rich and broad-ranging questions. We posed the same questions to each practice, and naturally we received an incredibly diverse array of answers. We aimed to highlight how and why these practices came to be to begin with, and at the same time question their purpose of existing between disciplines. Was it either to connect them or to obliterate disciplines, or was it something entirely different? And of course, we got to dream together and speak about dream projects and collaborations. Our line of questioning was partially inspired by the National Endowment for the Arts recent research on hybrid creative work, which is why we are so pleased to have Jax Deluca, Media Arts Director at NEA today, who we're going to introduce to moderate the panel shortly. A bit of background on our process and the goals for this publication. We, of course, took a hybrid approach, surveying hundreds of publications, periodicals, and white papers with the aim of devising a framework that highlights each practitioner's ideas, context, and insights. We were not trying to put together a yearbook, a survey, or a portfolio of practices and their works. We deliberately blurred the line between practitioner and practice, and did so by developing a format unique to our process. We employed an open grid with primary, secondary, and tertiary information in text, and an imagery that jointly highlights each practitioner's work environment, early career arc, current work, past lives, lifelong passions, and chosen communities, clients, commissions, and the cathartic elements of running an atypical practice. So themes emerge from these conversations that are validating at the very least. They're also insightful and very motivating. Almost everyone spoke about self-awareness, being aware of one's knowledge and what everyone can contribute, and the need for collaboration, the need for collective action and integration. Awareness of the need to take apart existing narratives driven from the Western society, from the desire in capitalism and hypermasculinity to be the sole player in solving things. Self-awareness of being a good listener and having deep time in observation. In the process of exploring these tensions and finding answers to these questions, all practices work closely with a wide range of other practitioners, with community organizers, healing experts, artists, and at the same time took many different roles, that of the visionary, the pollinator, the organizer, as practice A+A+A points out, taking the roles of a producer and a conductor to string together rehearsals, as Elsewhere Studio speaks about, and even turning to technology to deal with the complexities of being human, as Jared from our panel today so openly professes. Hybridity was defined again and again, but much of our conversations came down to a very human curiosity and an openness to ambiguity, and openness in existing in this undefined and ever-defined space, and doing so with grace. Shanna, one of our speakers today, beautifully put it, it is that melding between curiosity and experimentation. So we are thrilled to have with us three of the practices profiled in the book: Jared Katzman of his eponymous practice, Shauna Sabio of GrowHouse New York City, and Kate Machtiger of Terrestrial Studio. And if you're interested on the book, which we plan to publish early next year, in winter 2022, you can sign up for updates on the link on the chat, which we'll drop in a minute. To lead what we sure will be a very vibrant conversation, we are so privileged to have Jax Deluca, Media Arts Director at National Endowment for the Arts, who so graciously agreed to join us and dive into this wild world of hybridity, a world she's certainly familiar with due to some of the amazing research that Nia has recently released on the topic of hybridity and creativity. So thank you all for being here with us, and Jax, I will pass it on to you.
Awesome. Wow, I loved the way that you just presented that information too. I could have just watched those slides just circle on through for the next hour. That was a great preview, and I'm really super excited that this publication is coming out, and also that some of that work was inspired, some of this project was somewhat inspired by our Tech as Art publication that we just released with the Arts Endowment. So I'm really excited to just be here for that. And I will say I got a sneak preview of what the publication holds in a slower format the other night, and it is quite enjoyable, and there's so much to unpack. And this group has really done a fantastic job at really outlining all of the different layers and kind of unpacking the such diverse range and the multifaceted practices that each of these artists have. And the one thing that really is connecting you all is this sense of curiosity and bringing together all of these different aspects of themselves. So we have Jared and Shauna and Kate. I'm just trying to find you over here in the room. Let me get a different view. There you are. All right. So I thought it would be a good idea if we could just have you guys take a moment to introduce yourselves just for the people on this lovely panel, this call. Shauna, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Shauna Sabio. I am co-founder and co-director of GrowHouse NYC, an organization that I co-founded with my son, Warner. And one of the things that I always like to say is, I'm a bit of a nomad. I have monkey mind as well. And I think that has really helped me in terms of becoming a hybrid artist. I also am I'm lead organizer for the Flatbush African Burial Ground Coalition, a coalition that recently formed in June to protect a sacred space located here in Flatbush, where I am. And I guess my work sits at the intersection of art and technology, travel and education, and activism and entrepreneurship. So hence the monkey mind. My mind is always bouncing amongst all of these different themes and ideas. Yeah.
Thanks, Shauna. And Jared.
Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Jared. I use they, them pronouns. I guess this is gonna be the theme of it, of there's many names, many things we all do. I guess by trade, I've been I studied as a technologist and worked as a software engineer and researcher in various AI labs. And now I'm pursuing a doctorate in information, trying to understand what does it mean to build responsible technology? And, how do we understand how to hold it accountable and mitigate sort of any of the next negative externalities that we've been seeing commonly pop up in the news all the time. And with that, I'm like, I saddle between both technology and now social science research and computational social sciences. And then in the past, I've also worked in community engagement through this nonprofit out in tech, building out mentorship programs for LGBTQ college students interested in technology. And then with New Ink, been exploring the idea of, I guess, an artistic practice, integrating some of my AI technology and research into creative explorations and ways to sort of interrogate just the development of AI and sort of what does it say about us and how does it reflect on our own humanity and all that kind of good stuff.
Thanks, Jared. And Kate?
Hi, so I'm Kate. I'm a creative director at Invisible North, where I primarily work on experiential design. I'm also the founder of Terrestrial Studio, which I talk about in the publication. And I design spaces and experiences that engage the senses and build connection through exploration and play. And I'm really interested in sensory experience, and my sort of hybrid and kind of winding background goes back to like being a reformed investment banker who worked for Goldman Sachs. So I've just had a very hybrid path, let's say. And I think we can talk more about that as we get into it. But yeah, I'm really excited to be with this awesome group.
Score one for the arts to get you over to this side.
For sure.
So what I really admire about this group is your ability to really shape a meaningful practice around your strengths and your interests. And as we could just see from that initial introduction, there's so many interests and strengths that you all have and bring to your current practice. And this new publication really gets into uncovering some of the personal motivations that drive your practice and really looking at those intersecting elements. So even though we just did a brief introduction, I'd love to have each of you just go around and tell us a little bit more about the foundational aspects of what makes your hybrid practice. And Kate, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I think one theme for me has been balancing sort of my more logical side and some of that training. So I studied engineering and architecture, but and then went into finance and sort of have always had this side that's sort of math and science, but then always had this really creative and intuitive side. And I think some of the best creative outcomes come from really trusting that intuition. And so a big part of my practice is knowing when to balance those two things. And when does like a certain amount of rigor and logic really help move the process along or help you have a replicable process that you could bring to each project and start to finish and really be able to measure things, versus where do you really need to trust your instincts and find inspiration and look to nostalgia and look to things that are happening in the world that are sparking ideas and things that are universal about the human experience that can be translated into creative outcomes. And so I primarily work with space, and that's like the language I've always felt most comfortable expressing myself through as somebody who like played with Legos and blocks and now, you know, doing it in real life. And that for me is like my medium for communication mostly. And as COVID has happened, like translating that into virtual space. But I think, you know, that's just one tool through which you can sort of explore that balance. And I'd say, you know, another big like part of my practice is the sensory experience. A lot of that comes from my background and my personal history, and being diagnosed as autistic and realizing that that was sort of a differentiating and also like such an important part of my experience of the world, and that I was seeing the world in a way that maybe not everybody was. And so how do I use that to help everybody see things in some ways the way I see it, and then in other ways like create accessible spaces for other people who, you know, my sensory profile or what I enjoy being in spaces might not be the same as somebody else. So just having that understanding of, you know, what are all the different layers and light and sound and the things beyond just what you see. So yeah, that's the basis sort of my practice.
That's amazing. And thank you for sharing all of that with us. And I think navigating that space of what sensory means and really unpacking that and how that might translate to the different types of individuals that might be experiencing work or working that you're working with even as clients too. Are there any specific, if you had to pick a few of your key ingredients for your work, what would you say those would be?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, when I go and approach like a new space or a project, I like to think about the storytelling aspect, like how are you creating a narrative? And maybe that's, you're creating it from scratch, you're working with the client to say, you know, what are you trying to communicate through this space? Or maybe you're going into the history of their brand, let's say if it's like a commercial project, or the history of a concept, or there has to be a story. I think that's how humans communicate in many ways. And even if you're looking at something abstract and explorable like a space, there still needs to be thought around how that's communicated. Another thing for me that's big is like the personality that you're trying to get across. And for especially with working with brands, let's say, you know, a space from one brand is going to feel really different from another. And how do you take that abstract idea and turn that into a physical experience? So really understanding and zeroing in on that personality is important. And then finally, just introducing elements of play. I think, you know, that's something why are there playgrounds for kids and not adults? It's a question I keep asking. Nobody's given me a good answer. So I'll go build them. Hopefully.
Please build them. We need that. We need more of that. You're so wonderfully articulate about all of these aspects that come into your work. I would love to hear you talk about it all day, because the aspects of story and uncovering personality through that and keeping those elements of play while doing really serious work too is amazing. So I'll pass this over to Jared.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, a lot of the things that motivate my work is, I guess, really an interest in thinking about like radical and systemic change, and, you know, dealing with these really big complex problems, like trying to understand how is technology interacting with society, and what is it doing to our various institutions, and recognizing how much, because it's such a big problem, how many different lenses are important to thinking about and analyzing it. And so that's why, you know, I come at it from sort of, you know, when as a technologist thinking, oh, well, if I build better technology, then I could help solve this problem. And then recognizing, whoa, that actually isn't always the case. And sometimes it's the way it's interacting, and sometimes it's beyond sort of the technologist's control. And that's when we need to think about policy and ways of external accountability, or thinking about, you know, the cultural elements of how we all organize ourselves, and thinking about community organizing and what it means to sort of build the power when we maybe don't have the sort of the explicit hard power to make the changes we see. and then kind of undercutting all of this is sort of the artistic and creative lens to really think about how are you engaging the public, how are you having conversations, how are you sparking new ideas, and you know, I really love the metaphor of, you know, ecotones, which are sort of these boundary spaces in ecology where two different biomes sort of mix, and that's actually where the most biodiversity occurs, and really kind of trying to take that to sort of my practice and thinking that where sort of the most where some of the most profound ideas could generate is getting all these people together and thinking and learning from each other. I think a lot about like complex systems and this idea that if we start recognizing the really sometimes unknowable nature of the world and embracing that, it actually then can let us be a little bit more self-reflective and acknowledge sort of how all the different influences are at play at different moments in different contexts, and really helps us maybe recognize how we all have a contribution in different ways to sort of these large problems. And so I really just think it's thinking about, you know, I'm someone who believes in balance, and sort of that middle way in a lot of things, and really about sort of the authenticity and listening, and really thinking about what it means to transition and operate in a more collective mindset, so that we can really all work together to solve these, because no one's going to be able to solve a lot of these big issues alone.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, that was my first time hearing this term ecotone. So I wrote that down. I'm looking forward to reading and learning more about that. So if you had to pick 3 key ingredients that you kind of throw into your practice, what would you say those would be?
Yeah. I think like I could go simple with like fields, you know, like technology, policy, art. But then I want to kind of think maybe more like abstract and more values, and really thinking maybe like, you know, I guess just like the desire to, you know, be critical and ask questions, the desire to see both sides and really collaborate and try and think about something greater. And I think the last one's, I'll throw it in play. I've been really thinking a lot more about just really what does it mean to be doing this from a place of really authentic joy, and cultivating a desire for something rather than relying on discipline to force yourself to do things.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I feel like there might be a potential space for collaboration between you two, Jared and Kate. And also, I should mention, Kate, your website's so playful as well. So feel free to drop that in there. Oh, you did. Okay, great. And Shauna, let's pass it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what Kate and Jared said about experimentation and play resonate. One of the things I think is a driving force in my creative practice personally, and also my joint practice with Warner, is this idea of restoration and reclamation. So for people of color in our society, this idea of play and experimentation can feel frivolous at times, especially when there's so many serious issues that we're facing on a day-to-day basis. And so one of the key components to our practice is crafting physical spaces, and recently during COVID, more virtual spaces where people feel safe to break down those barriers that eventually, you know, will facilitate the play. I know for myself, much of what you said, Kate, about having adult play is one of the big pieces of GrowHouse's work. So we've done salons where, you know, we've had equipment that we've gotten sponsorships to bring in so that people can just have a very low risk, safe feeling environment to play around with new and emerging technologies, because sometimes there's that barrier of thinking like, oh my gosh, this is too much. I don't know how to do it. And I don't want to look stupid, especially when VR came out, everyone was like, this weird thing was on, what is this? And to create a space where people of color, in particular Black people, felt comfortable to lower those defenses that we have to wear all the time in life and just play and feel safe with one another is a really key and crucial part of our work. And that said, you know, a lot of our work is anti-racist and social justice focused, and it is intergenerational, and it really deals with social repair. So when you're able to actually relax your guard and you can do that intergenerationally, we believe that that is one form of restoration, in particular in a society that hasn't really been designed ever for Black joy and Black safety. So, you know, healing between generations is also a very big part of the work that we do.
It's amazing. And the work that you're doing is also so incredible. And it's reaching a lot of different aspects of this field, but also in that social practice field. And so what would be the 3 ingredients that you funnel into your practice if you were to kind of boil it down?
Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely experimentation and curiosity, and reigniting those in people, and participatory. Like, we don't want to be seen as experts with all the answers. We like to actually play alongside people and make things a lot more open and fluid. So an example of that would be recently in working with the African burial grounds, we've been doing these walking tours, and they're not the typical walking tour where you're listening to somebody talk. We actually give each person who goes on the walking tour a role to play, and they speak this role. And we also try to humanize the idea that the burial ground was actually a place where people interred loved ones. So we evoke emotion and empathy, which is another key piece of, I think, our work, is really not shying away from emotion and feeling and evoking those things together in safe spaces. And then I guess finally, one thing that we haven't been able to do as much due to COVID is travel. And by travel, that could be travel in imagination, but we also do like to physically travel to places and through spaces. Because as an artist, I'm sure many of us have experienced it. When you leave your typical environment and you go somewhere new, you generally come back with a renewed impression of where you actually were before. So to have that sort of veil stripped away from your everyday life and how you can sometimes get numb to the things around you, and you do that through travel and then you return, is another key piece of our work. And we've been doing some of that through the environments we've been creating virtually or even hyper locally, such as the Flatbush African Burial Ground walking tour, going to different spaces within a neighborhood that you might not have explored before, taking time, processing your senses, and then returning back.
That's great. So are these walking tours still available for people to participate in if they wanted to?
Yeah, for sure. The next one is going to be on October 16th, and it'll probably be, no, actually, I'm lying. The next one is on October 16th, and the last one will be on October 30th for the Day of the Dead, in time for the Day of the Dead. And the link is one of the first links that I think I populated in the chat, and I'll populate another one if it's not.
Awesome. So it's not a surprise that travel came up as one of your ingredients. This is a good segue into this next section. Something that's always been really fascinating to me is just learning about people's unique career trajectories. And since I got the pleasure of reading all of your interview transcripts, I got to learn a little bit about you. And everybody has so many stories to share about how you ended up where you are. And I feel like sharing some of these might be really useful for anybody who might be on this call that might be at a critical crossroad in their career. So Shanna, could you actually share some details about your personal journey and any particular turning points that led you to where you are?
When you said the travel, I figured that you were thinking about me being a flight attendant at home. Yeah, so I was joking with my best friend the other day. I'm like, I'm ruined for 9 to 5 forever. I don't think I can ever go back to a 9 to 5 job, partially due to being a flight attendant, but also just due to the way that my mind and my spirit functions in terms of these really diverse sets of interests. And, you know, when you're working in a corporate environment, generally, they want you to really silo yourself in one direction. And there are times when you get to work on projects that are, you know, multidisciplinary, but you're being measured against very specific, you know, goals. But anyway, back to my career trajectory. My first job ever was a mom, honestly. I feel like if I think about something that is rigorous and difficult and, you know, really, I think, undervalued in our society in terms of the intellectual labor as well as emotional labor that goes into working as a mom. That's definitely my first real job. But really, I would say I worked in corporate for Ann Taylor and Victoria's Secret for about 10 years total. I did instructional design for them. Education has always been a key theme, I feel, in my life. And it's actually shown up in my work at GrowHouse, and the ways that experimentation and play come into being. And then after I got laid off, I was just trying to figure out what to do. So I started renovating my house, and in renovating my house, I was like, you know, I really want to travel. I want to have a job that will allow me to travel. And something told me, you know, just apply, be a flight attendant. Let's see what happens. I applied to United and Delta. Both of them got back to me, but Delta got back to me first. And so I was like, okay, let's see what happens. This is just how my mind works. I'm like, let's see what happens. I do the interview, and then they're like, oh, okay, come down to Atlanta and you'll do an in-person interview. And I was like, okay, let's see what happens here. Go to the in-person interview, which is really weird. They have you in a room. It feels like you're in a fishbowl. You're being evaluated by 10 people. And additionally, flight attendants who are actually working are watching you and watching how you interact. And I'm like, okay, this is really interesting. This is an interesting study. And then finally, they're like, okay, you got the job. And I'm like, oh, wow, let's see what happens here. Went through basic training and on and on and on. But I think the beautiful thing about that experience was that I was able to take my then teenage children with me on layovers, especially long layovers abroad. And this is where it really started to connect to me. When you're a person of color and you are not, you know, we were teetering on middle class, pretty much, you know, we were struggling. And to be able to take young people out of an environment where they're feeling stressed by struggle and put them in an environment where they're actually experiencing things that they never thought they could experience, number one. And then you take them back to where they were before, their eyes are opened in terms of possibility. And so that is one of the seeds for GrowHouse that came into play. And my son obviously went on those trips with me. And whenever we would go, we would always try to find an art experience. So when we went to Madrid, actually when we went to Venice, we went to the Biennale. We actually got to go to Museo del Prado. We actually tried to figure out ways that we can infuse art, because all of my kids love art. And yeah, that's kind of a career trajectory for me. And then after we came back, I actually got injured as a flight attendant. So I wasn't able to work as a flight attendant anymore. And that's when GrowHouse was really born in earnest, was through that injury. So it's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, that's quite a story. And also just a nice reminder that things just kind of will work out in interesting ways. Well, I love that you arrived where you are, because GrowHouse is so exciting, and I'm sure your son also loves to be able to collaborate with you. Like I love everything about that. Jared, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for sharing that, Shanna. That was so insane. That was beautiful. I really relate. And I'll start my framing with like similar to you, where it's just like, I don't know, just picking things, being like, okay, we'll see how this goes. And just like that really just kind of like casual attitude is really, you know, looking back, just kind of how that kind of got me in a lot of places, either through implicit reasons or not. But I think, you know, I can kind of see maybe like 2 to 3 big pivot points for me in sort of my career trajectory, starting, you know, I mean, really starting at like the beginning, where how I really even got into technology was through the arts. I actually was doing, you know, painting classes and all of that as a child, and my fine arts teacher was just like, hey, do you know about websites and flash animation? And I'm like, no. And they started just teaching me like simple like action script, and then taught me like HTML and really started to like then develop into the graphic design and thinking more and these technical tools. And that's sort of, you know, at least in my childhood, really felt like I was living this sort of like my hybrid best self of integrating the technology and the art and all of that. But then I went through, I guess, an interesting, I grew up in New Jersey, and I went to, like, they have these sort of vocational public schools. And so my public school actually required all incoming students to pick a major. And so that was sort of when I was like tasked with sort of deciding between, do I go sort of the route of technology, or do I apply for like the performing arts or the visual arts or all of that, and had a really tough time thinking about that. You know, I was like 13 and still I was like, looking back, I'm just like, I don't know, why were they expecting me to think about that? And really looking back and thinking about all the influences that went into my decision, everything from my sister was a professional ballerina, and watching her live in that world and seeing just how difficult it was for her, and in all everything, psychologically, socially, physically, financially, and all of that, and thinking, okay, whoa, do I really want to do that? Mixed with I only think back now, you know, since I've done the growth and work of really also how much homophobia and misogyny influenced a lot of my decisions into what I thought I was wanting to, and I felt comfortable with doing. You know, I to be totally honest, I look back and I think a lot of the times I chose technology as a way of sort of shielding myself against sort of the potential harms and risks of being seen as overtly queer or too feminine or all of that kind of stuff, and really went, you know, that was right around the time of puberty, and really working as a way to use shame to kind of like to prevent myself from even desiring these sort of more artistic creative path, and turning to technology, which was sort of highlighted as, you know, people in I grew up in a place where, like, you know, they used to say like physics is a man's sport. You know, technology, it's a wealthy, you can get money, all the kind of stuff, and really sort of being drawn to those because of the sort of social and cultural environment I grew up in. And it really wasn't until, you know, I think going through and, you know, I sort of then really dived into technology. I learned coding. I was a white hat hacker and cybersecurity, did a lot of sort of like, they call them like capture the flag games and all that kind of all that. And then going into that's, you know, artificial intelligence development. And it really wasn't until I think it's interesting how these kind of coincided, where once I started working in industry as a software engineer, I was working at Amazon and their sort of AI labs, and got staffed on a project that I didn't really morally agree with, you know, automating away a low-income job with really no care or thought for like the sort of impacts of what this would have. And it caused in me this sort of, there's this phrase called like moral burnout, where you start to look at what different decisions you've made in your life, and when you're faced with something that maybe you think like, whoa, like that doesn't align with my morals and values. How did I get here? Why am I here? I thought I was operating in what aligned with myself. And then the problem with that is that you start to then question yourself in one domain, and then it sort of seeps in elsewhere and goes, well, if I wasn't operating in how I was thinking I was acting in this one place, how can I trust I was operating in any of my values in any other part of my life? And this sort of really coincided through with really fortunately finding a really good therapist and starting to also undo a lot of the emotional trauma and internalized gay shame that I was harboring from sort of all the years of my of my life, and going through and undoing that and recognizing all of the ways that I really prevented myself from not even following my values, but even knowing to my core what I like it was so deep that it's like I wasn't even able to even pay attention and admit who I thought I wanted to be or what I valued and what I cared for. And so sort of as these both were happening to me, that's honestly where this, you know, was like 2018, 2019, then found, you know, pretty much the pandemic happened and lockdown, and then got into New Ink and really had this like amazing space to, you know, I remember during camp the first week, I came in here thinking, okay, I'm going to do this new project and think about all these new ideas. And then the way the conversation went, I go, whoa, I'm actually hurting. I'm actually still haven't really healed from not only all of my sort of like my questions around identity, but then also my relationship to technology and my entire professional identity. And, you know, I kind of had to take a step back and go, whoa, actually this year is about healing. This is about returning back to why I got here to the first place, which is, you know, honestly, art. I got into technology because of the creative exploration, the fun, the play, and sort of the questions around how to do this in tandem with other people towards collective ideas and goals. And so really coming back to, I think, you know, to the ingredients of desire and what I'm looking for, I returned back to sort of the drawing board of where am I? Where do I want to go? What do I want to do? And thinking about the next paths. And that's sort of, I guess, what led me to pursue this sort of PhD program, you know, thinking about this just being like the best place for me to sort of explore, refine myself, and really find funding for different projects and go back to sort of theorizing these deep questions and giving myself the space to re-explore. And I think all of that, and I'm really fortunate. I'm in a super, they say, anti-disciplinary and even, you know, an interdisciplinary department, so that I'm really feel like I can embody all these different sides of myself. And while academia is very known for discipline and very focused, I feel very fortunate to be able to find these spaces and now feel aligned with who I really am, and not have to hide or stop myself from really pursuing who I really think, the people and the ideas that I really want to surround myself with.
Just want to give you a hug. That is such an amazing turnaround. And I really hope, like, do you feel like you've returned back to your childhood best hybrid self? Getting closer.
I honestly have the time. I'm like doing things. I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm like 10 again on internet forums, just like making art and doing tech and all that. And it's just like it's filled with love now instead of that sort of anxiety and shame. And I think that transition is half the battle.
Amazing. And what can you tell us actually what PhD program you're at and what you're kind of exploring, and then we'll pass it over to Kate.
Yeah, most definitely. So I just started about a month ago at University of Michigan. It's in their School of Information, and it's a PhD in information. And it's like this they have, the department has everybody from psychologists, behavioral economists, artists, historians, sociologists, computer scientists, all together to try and think about what are the impacts communication technologies and broadly, I guess, just any sort of technology is having on society, and thinking about how it's changing everything right now, and what are the methodologies for understanding. So,
well, I'm excited to see what you cook up there, because I know that you're going to have a lot of impact and really change some other people's lives too with your story. Mm-hmm. All right, Kate, I am dying to know how one goes from Wall Street to extraterrestrial studios. And I mean, I'm so excited. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Sure. Yeah. And I resonate a lot with what Jared and Shanna said about, you know, just sort of so many things, actually. I think like one, definitely the like social environment shaping, like Jared was talking about, sort of like what paths you're taking, because you're sort of dealing with stuff on the inside and you're like looking at what's evaluated, what's prized on the outside, and making decisions in that way. And then what Shauna was talking about with like sort of being an anthropologist, almost like being like, oh, this could be interesting. This is fun. Like, these people are new. Like, I'm curious to see what this whole world is like. And then suddenly finding yourself like with that title and that job and like working there. And you're like, oh, that was just supposed to be like an experiment. But it's fun. And I think, you know, I think that curiosity is definitely what connects us all and is, you know, allowing us to make bridges between different disciplines. Yeah, I mean, I also had a high school like computer art experience. Maybe that's like the foundational New Ink story, is like somehow at some point in our teenage 20s, we, you know, we're making some weird art on the computer. But I learned like Photoshop and that through some like weird elective high school, like, you know, career prep kind of, not even career prep. It was just sort of like shop class. Like they were like, oh, we're going to experiment with this thing called computers and art. And so I learned Photoshop and that kind of stuff, very low level. But I think, and then I continued in college, like working on magazines and doing design. So even though I was you know, not, that didn't become my career. That was always sort of like a skill set I had. And I think, so some of the crazy like transitioning from Wall Street to doing design is like, I had always done design and I sort of got sidetracked. But I think, yeah, I went into college knowing, you know, I had always had some skills in spatial thinking, and architecture seemed to be this perfect place for hybrid people because it was math and it was science, but it was art and it was creative. I was like, this is going to be everything I dreamed of. And then sort of got disenchanted, as many people do in architecture school, with just sort of the rigidity of the system, the hierarchy of everything, how long it took to just, and I mean, there's good reasons buildings take a long time to build so that they stand upright, but there's like a lot of things in architecture are just slow and take a long time. Or, you know, there was also this trend going on, which I think is still a bit continuing, maybe being pared back a bit, which was, it's sculpture. Like, these are just big sculptural pieces that these architects put out, and then you help like figure out how the bathroom stall, what size it should be if you're like a junior architect for this architect sculpture piece, which was not, I was always interested in like, what about the real people? And like, when they're walking through the space, like, are they gonna have a good time? What do they think about it? Do they like it? Is this a fun experience? And then at the time, and maybe I just got jaded too quickly, there just didn't seem to be a place for that conversation. And so I was like, you know what, I'll just make money instead. And then I'll figure it out. Then I'll figure out my life. I'll like figure out how to like pay my rent and all that and not really worry. And then, you know, I was lucky enough to be in a school where like Wall Street recruited, and that was an established path, and they weren't looking for experience. They were just looking for good grades in a somewhat math related thing. And I was doing civil engineering, ended up being my major. So went to Wall Street, investment banking, spent way more time designing the PowerPoint slides than most of the other analysts, and way less time. I mean, I think the numbers were right, but I didn't love like spending a lot of time on that. Despite the fact like I've always been good at math, it just didn't seem like it had much purpose. Maybe similar to Jared, I was like, why am I here? But I definitely was interested in like, why do companies make any of these decisions that they make? Like, what's actually going on? Why are they coming to us asking us to help them with this thing that they wanted to do financially? Like, what's going on inside the machine? And then so went to business school because that was kind of like an established way to like get out of finance into other things without having to do much thinking about who I was or what I wanted to do. And then went into strategy and innovation consulting practice, which was really interesting. Did a lot of work and doing a lot of things that were more for the public good, which was like a nice contrast. We did a lot of work with the Obama administration and education and career and technical ed. Like, how are we sort of helping people find those jobs? Maker spaces, all kinds of projects in that space. But through that experience, I sort of realized there's the difference between what the job sounds like and what the job actually is day to day when you do it. And I realized what I actually enjoyed day to day was the design elements, making the PowerPoints, making the graphic design assets that we were putting out, and just sort of creeping my way to that side of the business and saying, hey, we don't have a department for this. Can I start a department for this? And after they had known me for 3 years, like, they said, okay, you know, try it. And that was sort of the beginning of me rebranding myself as sort of a designer, or going back to my interest in design. And that was also when I was really exploring, like, why am I so burnt out all the time? Why I've never really figured out why, like, there's always been this missing piece for me. Everything seems so hard. I'm so exhausted. Being in these corporate spaces is so difficult. And that was sort of getting my autism diagnosis and figuring that out. And then, you know, just total burnout, quit my job. But it was like a freeing thing, and started freelancing for lots of different people, doing stuff, you know, with the former Ace Hotel people who are doing new hotel projects, and then moving into designing stores for a branding team that, you know, they did logos, but they didn't have somebody to do stores, and they had clients coming saying, we love your work, could you help us with the store? And yeah, rediscovering sort of my architecture and all that, and that led to Terrestrial Studio and Newing, because really also helped me, you know, become more confident about telling my story, and always thinking of it as something that othered me, but I think in a sense, it's actually kind of a universal story amongst a lot of people in our community and technology. There's a lot of neurodivergent people in that community, but also just this idea of like being forced into a mold, and trying to fit into that just to like please everybody else, and then realizing you're actually not enjoying it at all. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my work is also about how to be like grounded in yourself. And I think sensory experience is that bridge into, you're not just going through the motions of life, you're actually there. And so I think there's like, that deeper side to it is something that I want to continue to explore as well.
Amazing. I love that story, and everything about that makes sense when you kind of talk through that trajectory, even thinking about when you were working in architecture and how you're really thinking about like how's somebody going to explore the space. Just from thinking of that, it's so unique because you're so interested in it's that story and the social design, and all those aspects now are really what makes all of the work that you're doing just so comprehensive in different ways. And do you feel like you're also on the path to being your hybrid best self?
Yeah, for sure. I think, it's always hard. It's like the explaining yourself and then the being yourself. Like it gets harder to explain the further you become your most hybrid self, unfortunately, but it gets easier to be it. So
it seems like it would be impossible to pigeonhole any one of you. So this is so exciting to hear about all of these stories, and we are getting closer towards the end of this panel. So I thought maybe since we're nearing the end of our time, it might be useful to just see if anybody had any questions who are tuned in. And while we wait for questions, I'll just throw out one last one for you guys, and feel free to jump in whenever. And if anybody has a question, feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand. We'll find you in there. So maybe this is a moment to just see if there's any particular successes or challenges or surprises that you've encountered that could be useful experiences for others to learn from. So I'll just throw that as an opener and start scanning for questions.
I mean, I guess I feel like in terms of lessons, it's really easy to experience what would be called mission drift as a hybrid artist. And what I found is, contorting myself to kind of fit a specific narrative based on what grants we're applying for. And I guess something struck me when Jared was talking about understanding his values. I think for any hybrid artist, it is super important to understand what your values are, and to stay true to them, and also make sure that you're building within a community of folks who are also thinking that way, to provide that level of accountability and support, because it can be really easy in the process of trying to market yourself to end up, I'm speaking for myself anyway, drifting down a path that you didn't actually really want to go in. Yeah, I think that's my one piece of advice. I hope it's helpful.
That is some great advice.
And I'll build off that because that was kind of very similar to the piece of advice or lessons I've had myself. Is honestly like a manager called this out for me, where he gave me the insight that for most of my career, he noticed, or like for the way I just talked to it, I always chased the idea that I thought was the most interesting, and the one I thought was cool, I want to work on. Oh, that sounds like that'd be so awesome to do. And I think similar, it's like you somehow just then find out, you then get there, and then you're like, wait, where am I? And instead he was like, you actually should be, instead of focusing on the ideas you're following, you should be really focusing on the people you're trying to create with. Because I think what I was dealing with was I was in the place, I thought I was in my my dream role, doing exactly what I wanted, and we were working on the idea that I wanted to, but we didn't have the same values, and we didn't have the same we didn't have the same ideas then. And then everything we produced, I'd be like, I actually don't like this. and recognizing that it's like, even if you're on the coolest idea with not cool people, it's like you're not going to produce the cool work you want, and really focusing on finding that community that you want to be situating yourself. Because I think it's like the ideas will come and go and it's really like the people you surround yourself that will shape how you think, and allow you to either afford you either the fertilizer to really be your best self, or sort of the extra friction that you're always going to have to be arguing or fighting with. And you can sometimes overcome, but it's like, you much rather, I don't know, I always say like, I much rather be planted in fertilizer than like a bunch of rocks. So.
That's a really good point. It reminds me of a term that Brian Eno had coined called scenius. And that was really just about like how important it is for there to be a group of people as part of a scene that could really make a collective genius versus kind of that solo component, because it is kind of all of these different aspects that can really make the elevation happen. So we have a question. Seems more of a statement about, is hybridity another phrase for a new uncharted path? And I'll throw that out there. And also I'll leave some space too to see if Kate wanted to also chime in.
I mean, I think my advice is sort of related to that question, which is just that I think the hardest thing about doing this new uncharted path kind of stuff is that people don't really know what you're talking about. They can't really grasp it until you do it, but you can't always get the money to do it until you get them to grasp it. So it's just like this endless loop. But I feel like experimenting and like the little things that, like to prove that I could do stores, I did like little diorama spaces like out of like old recycled boxes. Like, I think if you're looking to change careers, my advice would be like, find the little things you can like show that you can do this other thing, or this little thing that explains the idea. And sometimes that can help get you to the big one.
That's a really good point. Shanna?
I just wanted to jump in because what you said, Kate, about people not understanding what you're talking about until you do it is so true. It's 100% true. And I think that's really where having a community of people who are like you helps, because they're people that will dream with you and not shoot down your dreams or try to contort you into what they know is possible, and try to put you in the realm of what they've seen before. And I find that just having this conversation, I want to thank Eric and Penelope and Jax for this, because it does feel very reaffirming to know that you're not alone in thinking this way, and to be able to discuss these things openly, because art, I felt for a while, and this has reinvigorated my hope, was kind of getting to a place where you have to be in a box that is easy to consume and easy to market. And just hearing what Kate said about, who cares about that? Just do what you feel you care about, and then do it in smaller scales to help people understand, because you're always going to be kind of, I don't want to say ahead of the curve, but you're always going to be thinking differently. And people need to understand. You need to have people who understand what you're talking about, but you also need the balance of having people who can dream and see things that aren't yet in existence.
Articulating the vision and putting a little bit of the feasibility component behind it is so useful. And also, even on our end at the Jax Endowment, when we're looking at grants and we have grant reviewers look at it, part of that is, can the person or the organization demonstrate feasibility? Because then that's what makes it easier for people to invest in that vision and making it happen too. Well, this is great. Thank you all for being so open and generous with your conversation and your stories and sharing your journeys. I look forward to just hopefully crossing paths with each of you in the future. And I am so excited about this publication that you guys have put out. So I'm going to pass this over to Eric and Penelope for some closing notes. So bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jax. Thank you, guys. Wow. I mean, wow. We have no additive words to that. Just wanted to thank, first and foremost, thank Rena again for sponsoring a lot of this research and publication out of her own honorarium, being our hybrid practice track mentor. So thank you. And thanks to all the fine folks at New Ink for being super supportive of our work and co-hosting this panel with us. We're really excited to continue to plus up everyone's work and work with y'all. I also, of course, want to thank Andrew, who's our kind of fellow Pied Piper on this journey, technologist, graphic designer, who now is studying architecture despite Penelope and I's advice, which we totally respect. And we're very excited to kind of bring this publication home with you. And I'm going to drop another link in the chat now if you guys want updates on the release and how it's going. By all means, sign up. Finally, of course, and not lastly, I want to thank Jax for moderating. I want to thank Jared, Kate, and Shauna for your incredibly brave and vulnerable conversation, which of course we're unsurprised about because you were so awesome during the interviews, but such a pleasure. I'm just going to end with some just words that came up because it was so inspiring and broad ranging. And neurodiversity, accountability, identity, restoration, reclamation, joy, play, participatory healing, emotion, and empathy. So we'll end on that note. Thank you guys so much all for attending. Stay tuned and have an awesome night.
Thank you all. Good night.